Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining Oasis Solutions for today's Sage 100 Tips and Tricks webinar. Today's session is pre-recorded, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the presentation, and they will be followed up with following the presentation. So you can use the Q&A feature in your session that you have connected with, or you can always follow up after the session to Garen Stout. Her email address is gstout, S-T-O-U-T, at oasisky.com. You can feel free to email Garen any questions that you have regarding this presentation, and she will be glad to follow up with you and get you the answers. Also, I'd like to note at the time of this recording, I am working in the 2020 version. By the time this presentation is aired, the Sage 100 2021 version should be available. And there's a couple of things that are new in the 2021 version related to purchase order that I will also talk about during this presentation. So again, thank you for joining us today, and please do not hesitate to submit any questions that you may have. So today's presentation is based a lot on questions that come into our support team or issues that people may run into with purchase order. So we're going to talk about a few different things today. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is in your setup. We're going to look at the purchase order options, because as you are using the purchase order module, and hopefully you are doing your period end processing consistently within that module, there are some history settings that you need to be aware of to before you start doing period end, or before you start doing purging of any data if you're trying to clean up some stuff after today's presentation. So in the purchase order options on the main tab, you have the first thing is the number of days to retain completed purchase orders. And my demo data is set to 365. The maximum number of days you can set it to in this version is 999 days. But what happens is, when you set this feature, when a purchase order is completed and a completed PO is basically determined as fully received and fully invoiced, when you do period end processing in the purchase order module, it comes out and takes a look at how many days you want to retain completed purchase orders. And if it says, okay, they only want to keep completed POs for 365 days. So as I'm doing period end, Sage is going to go take a look, and any POs that were completed more than 365 days ago, it's going to purge them out of your history. So it's very important that you want this number to be high enough that you're not, if this accidentally got set to 0 or 90 and you did a period end processing, it's going to remove a lot of purchase orders and things that you may actually want to keep in history for a much longer time. So keep in mind that once you purge those, the only way that you can get them back is to restore from a backup. And you really don't want to have to do that, because it's not just impacting you, but you may have to then do rekeying. There may be issues. You may have to restore your AP as well, because if you're having to do a restore and you've also done some receipt of invoice, so then you think it affects AP, it's affecting inventory management with receipt of goods, it's affecting your general ledger with those. So a whole lot of people may be doing a whole lot of rework if you are not really watching and paying attention to how your setup is done. Another feature that we have here is that you can automatically close purchase orders if a PO, if the quantity received in invoice is within a certain percentage. So this may be applicable to companies that maybe you buy a fertilizer by the tanker, and that tanker of fertilizer could be 12,000 pounds, and that's what you issued the PO for, but in reality, it may come in at 11,872 pounds, and they're not going to back order what wasn't on the tanker. So in situations like that, you can also say that you want to close POs if they are received within a certain variance. Again, that's up to you. We're going to go over here to the History tab real quick. And this also is some areas where it talks about whether or not you want to retain history. Years to retain purchase history by item and by vendor. The minimum you can keep this history is years, not days, like the first tab. So the minimum is 2 years, and you can go up to 99 years. But then this also talks about whether or not you want to retain your purchase order history. If you want to retain deleted POs, and your options are yes, no, or prompt. If you say yes, obviously it retains your deleted POs. If you say no, it does not retain them. And if you say prompt, there is a section in the setup where you can have reason codes. And if it says prompt, you're going to be prompted to give a reason why you're deleting that purchase order. And it's good for an audit trail. I would say that you should either have a prompt set or say yes, that you want to keep those deleted POs. This is to keep the entire PO. This is saying, do you want to retain deleted lines? So if you issue a PO for X number of items and then a line gets removed, do you want to keep that history? So again, just kind of think about your internal processes and whether or not you want to keep that. And then also if you want to retain the receipt history. And I can't think of any reason why you would not want to retain the receipt history, because many times you're going to go back and look at that receipt history and see what's happened on a PO. And you have retained lines in the receipt history. The retaining of the lines is for the receipt of goods. In the version 2021, they are going to also allow you to retain the line items. Actually, let me rephrase that. This is to retain the comment lines in history. They are going to be adding a feature in 2021 where when you do receipt of invoice, you are going to have the option to retain that line history as well. So that is something that is going to be available within the 2021 version. So those are kind of the options I wanted to talk about today. So we're going to go ahead and click accept and exit out of there. The other thing that I want to make you aware that's going to be released with the 2021 version is the new 1099 NEC form is now going to be an option in when you're doing a receipt of invoice, is having that option for the 1099 NEC form. Now, granted, you may or may not need that when you're doing a PO, but you may issue a PO to your lawn care people, and they get a 1099 because they're an independent contractor. So with the version 2020, for 2018, 19, and 20, there was a service update at the end of the 2020 calendar year to add that 1099 NEC form, but it was only available in accounts payable. It was not available in purchase order. So with the release of 2021, they are adding that feature to be available in purchase order as well. So I do want to make that make you aware of that, and so that may be another reason to consider upgrading your Sage 100. The next thing we're going to take a look at is we're going to go into purchase order entry, and we're going to take a look at the different types of purchase orders you can issue. And I'm going to just kind of do one from scratch so that you can see the different drop-down boxes. So I'm just assigning the next PO number. You're going to notice that the order date is going to default to my system date. I can obviously change this by either clicking on the calendar, or I can just key in this field and override it. And the order type, it is going to default to a standard order. But if you click on this drop-down box, you have other options. And we're going to talk about those options and what they are. So you can do drop ship, you can do master orders, you can do repeating orders, or you can do material requisitions. So the first item, standard order, is exactly what it says. It's a standard PO. It's kind of like a one-off. It's not something maybe you order every month or every quarter. It's just, you know, as your inventory level gets to a certain, as your inventory gets to a certain level, then you know you need to issue a PO. So that's kind of what your standard PO is. A drop ship. So if I do a drop ship, it is going to ask if you're referencing a certain sales order number. And here is the most important thing to think about, to remember if you do drop ships. In Sage terminology, a drop ship implies that nothing is ever going to hit your inventory. So a drop ship means that you're ordering it from your vendor and it's going to be drop shipped directly to your customer. So again, there's not going to be a receipt of goods because it's being drop shipped. The critical piece to remember is on the sales order side, your sales order also has to be set as a drop ship, because it is not, because if it is set as a drop ship on the sales order side, when you invoice your customer, Sage is not going to reduce your inventory. So if your sales order, assuming you use sales order, if you don't use sales order, you don't have to worry about it. But anytime there is something designated as a drop ship, Sage is going to assume that it is not coming into your inventory, and there's not going to be any type of receipt in. And on the sales order side, when you sell it, it is not going to come out of inventory. So if you, let's say that you don't use the sales order module and you are going to drop ship this to your customer, if you just tell the customer, yeah, I'm going to drop ship it, you call your vendor, I want you to drop ship this to, you know, my customer at this address, but you do this purchase order as a standard order, Sage is going to assume that you're going to do a receipt of goods. So that PO is going to hang out there forever because you have not done a receipt of goods on it. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions about that, or you do drop ships and you find that, oh, maybe that's the reason why these POs are staying open forever, we can, later in the presentation, I'm going to talk to you about how to clean up and purge old purchase orders. But that could very well be a reason as to why that PO is not closing out. So again, if it's a drop ship and if you use sales order, your sales order type and your PO type both must be drop ship. If not, it's going to mess up your inventory. If you only use sales order, or excuse me, if you only use purchase order and then you use drop ship, The only thing that you're going to be entering then is a receipt of invoice. You will not be doing a receipt of goods because it's never going to come into your inventory. So if you have any questions about that, or you want to kind of dive in a little bit deeper, just let us know, and our team will be glad to help you with that. So I'm going to cancel out of this, and yes, I want to cancel that. And I'm going to show you a couple of other orders that I already have set up in the system. So this is a repeating order. And a repeating order, sometimes people call these a blanket order. You may have other terminology, but a repeating order would be something that maybe, you know, on a monthly basis, you always order most of the same items and usually around the same quantity. So you can set up a repeating order in the purchase order module so that it basically is going to save you a lot of keystrokes when you go to do that monthly PO. So when you do a repeating order, you're going to go to your lines tab, and you're going to enter in the items that you routinely would be on your repeating order and the quantity. And think of this as a template. Okay? If you notice when I go back to the header tab, it shows the order status, which is new, and I haven't issued any standard orders against the repeating order yet. It's going to pull the 1099 form from your vendor maintenance. Again, with 2021, you'll see the NEC form as an option in here. It will track, once you start issuing standard POs against this repeating purchase order, it's going to track the last PO number that you issued and the date. And also you can give it an expiration date. So, maybe you want this to end at the end of every year. This, my demo data is working in the year 2025, so that's why I put in an expiration of 12/31 of 2025. So again, I've got this information filled out. I go to my lines tab. I'm going to key in or add any items that I may want on my repeating purchase order. And then I'm going to just accept that. So when it's time to order things from that repeating order, I'm going to issue a standard PO. And I'm just going to change my date here since I'm working in 2025. I'm going to issue a standard PO, but I'm going to reference my repeating order. And the repeating order that we were just looking at was 143. So I'm going to pull that in. So when I reference this repeating order and I go to my lines tab, it pulls in everything that was on that original repeating order. Now with that, I can make edits to this if I choose to, and it's only going to affect this standard order. It's not going to edit my original repeating order. So let's say this month on this particular line item for this desk set, instead of ordering 13, I really only need 5. So I could change that for this PO. And let's say that I want to add an item that's just related to this purchase order only. I can go in and add an item as well. If this line item number 2, let's say that I don't need to order that at all this month, I can highlight that and remove that line from my PO. And again, it's only affecting the standard PO 46. It is not making any changes whatsoever to my repeating order template. And I'm going to go through, and there is my purchase order information, and I'm going to accept it. And I believe I'm going to go back to my repeating order. I don't think I have to, I don't have to print it. So now it shows that the last PO I issued was 146, and that was the last PO date. So it's going to track every time that a PO is issued against this repeating order. And then you're also going to be able to see in your history that information as well, so that you can kind of keep track of it. So that's what a repeating order does. Now, the next thing we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at a master order that I already have set up. And a master order also could be considered a blanket order, depending on your terminology. But what a master order is that if, let's say that you talk to your vendor at the beginning of the year and you say, you know, I think over the next calendar year, we're going to order X number of desks, X number of trays, X number of chairs. You know, what kind of price can you give me if I order this many of an item over the next 12 months? So once you have that information, I'm going to just change this to non-taxable in my demo data. Then you're going to set up a master order, and you're going to go to your lines tab. And I have two items here that I've you know, in my scenario, that over the period of the next year, I'm going to order 75 of these. Now, it may not be consistent. One month I may order 2, the next month I may order 30. You know, just depends on my busy season and things of that nature. But I've gotten a deal on 75, and I can override my unit cost that pulls from inventory. So let's just say that I can get those for $25 a piece. That was the deal, and this will be $20 a piece. So I'm going to click accept. And with a master order, let me go back to that one more time and show you something. So with the master order, again, you'll notice that it doesn't reference anything else listed over here. When I'm ready to start ordering off of this master, I'm going to issue a new purchase order. It's going to be a standard order. And I'm going to reference my master order. Okay? I'm going to go to my lines tab. It's going to pull those items, and let's say this month I want to order 15 of these, and I'm going to order 10 of these. So I'm issuing a standard order against the master, and this is what I'm ordering this particular month. So I'm going to go ahead and click accept. And if I go back and I look at my master order and go to my lines, go to my totals. Oh, I'm sorry. This is right. So when I look at my item down here, and I can pull this ordered to date, I can pull this column up if I want to, if I want to see it up here. But it shows the original quantity on my master order. I can see how many were ordered to date and what my balance is left on this master order. So I can track how many I've ordered against this master. And the other thing is, on a master order, you also can have an expiration date. So if it's 2025 and my vendor said, okay, you know, we'll give you this deal, but this deal is only good through the end of the year for you ordering those 75, you're going to have to get with us next year to negotiate a new deal. Once this order has expired, then if you're trying to auto-generate your purchase orders, it will no longer auto-generate a standard order off of this master because it's past the expiration date. So that's another reason to have that in there. So again, a master order is more of like a huge quantity that you may be ordering over a year period. You know, maybe you have a 3-year agreement with this vendor, and it's a quantity and a price guarantee over the next 3 years. So you're typically going to have higher quantities on that master order. A repeating order is, and you can have that repeating order set up as a template. Let's say that you order from a vendor, and it can be one of 20 items. And every month it's a combination of those 20 items. You could set up a repeating order and have all of those items listed with a quantity of 0, and use that as a template to generate your standard order off of it, and then just fill in the blanks on the quantity that you're ordering and remove the lines that are not applicable. So if it's just one line item or 2 line items, repeating or master order may not save you much time. But if it's a significant amount of line items, I have some clients that they may have a repeating order with 150 line items on it, because each month they may be ordering, or each purchase order, they may be ordering 100 to 120 line items, and they don't want to have to type that every month. So it can save a lot of time doing that. So if you have any questions or you need assistance on setting up drop ships or understanding how that works, setting up repeating orders or master orders, please feel free to let us know. And then the last example that I'm going to show, and I have rarely run into any clients that use this, but it is a feature that's available, is that when you're issuing a PO, you have material requisition. And watch how my screen changes when I say that this is a material rec. So it removes a lot of the information, and it adds a field of requested by. So it removes your vendor information, and it says requested by and department. And you can then go in and fill in your lines as normal. So what this can be used for is, let's say, a good example of this may be if you have a central supply and you inventory your office supplies. And when I need copy paper and I need paper clips and staples, I send a requisition to Central Supply. They pull those for me, and then those end up actually getting charged back to my department because I have a budget, an annual budget for office supplies. So what this does is it allows you internally to request those supplies, and it pulls them from inventory, and then you can back charge the department if you want to. But that's what a material requisition does. I've seen this used a lot in medical offices because they typically do have central supply for various things, whether it be administrative supplies or it be some type of a medical supply. You know, it's Band-Aids, gauze, you know, anything like that. So you may use that as well. So if you do have questions about that, please let us know. Here's another example of where I've seen this used, is that if your sales team is allowed to pull items from inventory to, you know, drop off samples to clients, you know, obviously you're going to be pulling that from inventory, and you may use a material requisition for that as well. So that's another example of how that might be used. So that runs through the various types of purchase orders that you can issue within Sage 100. The next thing that I want to talk about is receipt of goods versus receipt of invoice. And if you have inventory or miscellaneous items, you have to do a receipt of goods when that information, or excuse me, not what information, when the merchandise is received in. So you're going to go into the receipt of goods, and you're going to issue the next receipt number. You're going to put in your receipt date, and you're going to pull from the purchase order which PO you're receiving, and I'm just going to grab one here. And you're going to go to your Lines tab, and it's going to come up and say, do you want to receive this order complete? If you say yes, and I'm going to show you what happens if you say yes. Well, that was obviously a very bad example. So let's cancel out of here. Yes. And let's do another one. And let's do what I know should be on here. Do you want to receive it complete? Yes. So it fills in all of the items that was on the original PO, and it fills in the, it shows you how many was ordered, and it makes the quantity received the same as the quantity ordered. So I'm going to cancel out of this. And 46, okay. Yes, cancel it. So I'm going to do another receipt of goods. I'm going to pull the same PO. I'm going to go to Lines. Do I want to receive this complete? I'm going to answer no so you can see what happens here. So I'm going to say no. So at this point, it pulls in all of the items, the quantity ordered, but then you manually can key in the amount. So that's literally the difference between saying yes or no. If you say yes and it fills in the quantity received, you can always overwrite those numbers or even remove line items if you didn't receive anything. Or you can leave the quantity received, leave that item there and leave the quantity received at 0. So I just wanted to kind of show you the difference between that. So I'm going to go back to the header tab. And when you do a receipt of goods, if you are using accounts payable, and if your purchase order module is set up to integrate with AP, then you can you do your invoices related to purchase orders through the receipt of goods entry or receipt of invoice. If at the time the merchandise comes in, you receive the merchandise and the PO at the same time, you can do both entries in one fell swoop. So you can do your receipt of goods, and then you can also reference your invoice number here and put in the actual invoice date. And then when you go to your Lines tab, whatever you enter in as received, it's going to assume that that's also how many you were invoiced for, okay? If you do not have the invoice and you're only receiving the information in, or maybe you don't want your warehouse staff entering in anything related to AP, you're going to leave this information blank. And at that point, what this is going to do, I don't want to put an invoice number in there. Is it going to let me delete it? Nope, it is not. So let me just go back here. If you leave this invoice number blank, then what happens is it only does a receipt of goods, and it assumes that later you are going to go in, and I'll just say yes to this. It's going to assume that at some point you are going to go in and do a separate receipt of invoice, okay? So that's where you're going to give it another receipt number. You're going to reference the original PO. And it pulled it up because I haven't updated the receipt of goods yet. And then I'm going to put in the invoice. Nope, okay. It's not going to let me do it because I have that open receipt of goods. But you're going to type in the invoice number and date, and then on the Lines tab, you're going to put in how many you're being invoiced for. So again, you may receive less and you're being invoiced for less than the number that was on the actual order. So that purchase order then goes into a back order status, and it will sit there and wait for it to be fully received and fully invoiced. So hopefully that makes sense, that you can Let me go back and, okay, so that you can, let me go back to receipt of goods, pardon me. So with the receipt of goods, you can do receipt of goods only, or you can do receipt of goods and invoice at the same time. Now, one of the things we're going to look at next is purchases clearing, because I've never run into anyone that doesn't have a bunch of old POs that are sitting out there and they're trying to figure out, what do I do to get rid of these POs? And I'm going to show you how to determine why they're opened. But most of the time, the reason that they're open is they haven't been fully received, or maybe you did a receipt of goods, but instead of doing a receipt of invoice, you accidentally entered the invoice directly into the AP module, which doesn't tie back to the PO. So if you have it set up in your purchase order module that you are wanting to do the receipt of invoice and you're integrating with AP to do those invoices, then you must do the receipt of invoice in the purchase order module, or that PO is never going to be considered completed. So that happens quite often where the AP department gets that invoice, they throw it into AP data entry instead of doing it properly through the purchase order module. So just kind of keep in mind that if you're not going through this whole process completely, then you're going to have open POs out there that are going to hang on forever until you take the time to figure out why they're open and clean them up. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of the difference between the receipt of goods entry and receipt of invoice, and why those are important. And the next thing we're going to talk about is all of those old open POs and how do we clean them up. So one of the things that how you can determine a lot of those old purchase orders is in the purchase order module. If you go to period end and you go to the purchases clearing report. So we're going to open this purchases clearing, and I'm just going to do a preview here. You have all kinds of different options that you can use, but let's take a look at this report. And let me make it just a little bit bigger for you guys. So purchases clearing is basically showing me, and I ran this report just for inventory items. You can run it for miscellaneous items as well, or for everything. Now, obviously, if you have a miscellaneous charge code, there's no receipt of goods related to that, but you can have it show up if it's on an open PO. But basically what this report is showing me is it's showing me all of the open POs that I have in my system. And it's showing me the reason that they're open. So on this PO number 3, I ordered a quantity of this line item. You'll notice that I have multiple line items here. I ordered 100 of these. I received 99, and somehow I've invoiced a -1. Not sure how that happened in the demo data. Here's another one. I've ordered 66 of this item. I've received 50, and I haven't invoiced any of them. So a purchase order is considered complete when the quantity received and the quantity invoiced equal the quantity ordered. So you may run this report, and it may have POs out there from 15 years ago, and you're like, we're never going to receive that item. I just need to get them off of the list. So we're going to talk about ways that you can do that. Now, starting in probably the 2017, 2018 version, Sage added utilities to be able to clean these items up easier. On the older versions, there really were no utilities to clean up these old POs, or the utilities that were in there didn't have the best functionality. Sage has resolved all of that. These utilities that we're going to look at work well, but you really need to understand and not just arbitrarily clean up things. You really need to take the time to research these POs and try to determine, especially if they're more recent, why that they remain open when you're thinking they should be closed. And then you see down here a report total. One of the things that you need to be aware of is that Sage 100 uses a GL account called Purchases Clearing. And most everyone in their general ledger does have a Purchases Clearing account number. Sometimes maybe they'll use something different, but they really shouldn't. They should have a designated GL account. So what happens is when you issue a purchase order, there's no effect to the general ledger whatsoever. When you do a receipt of goods, so when you do that receipt of goods and update it, it does make a transaction to your general ledger. So what it does is the receipt of goods, this is a receipt of goods only. It debits your inventory account and it credits your Purchases Clearing. And then when you do the receipt of invoice, that receipt of invoice debits your Purchases Clearing and credits your AP, your liability account. So your Purchases Clearing is really a wash account. When you do a receipt of goods, it hits Purchases Clearing. When you do receipt of invoice, it comes out of Purchases Clearing. So theoretically, if all of your purchase orders are closed and completed, your Purchases Clearing account should be $0. Now, when we do the utilities that I'm going to review next, keep in mind, and this is very important, is that it is not going to have any effect on your general ledger. So although it is cleaning up your Purchases Clearing report and it is purging old bad history, it is not going to affect the GL, and you need to know what entry needs to be made to your Purchases Clearing to clean that up on the GL side. And that's something that, you know, we can help you through the utilities and so forth. We can't advise you what that number should be when you do a journal entry. You know, you need to talk to your controller about that, your CPA or whomever, to work on getting that cleaned up. But just keep in mind that cleaning up your purchase order module is only going to do just that, clean up PO. It is not going to affect your general ledger. So just to go over that one time, when you do a receipt of goods only without a receipt of invoice, it debits inventory and it credits Purchases Clearing. When you do the second receipt of invoice, it debits your Purchases Clearing and it credits AP. If you do receipt of goods and receipt of invoice at the same time, it will debit your inventory and credit AP, and nothing hits that wash account for Purchases Clearing. So again, take a look at the Purchases Clearing report. If no one looks at this on a monthly basis, don't be frightened when you see it, because it could be gigantic. And I've seen where the list so long is that in that Purchases Clearing, you know, there might be $1 million sitting in that account. So you really need to spend a lot of time determining what needs to be cleaned up, why, and how it's going to affect your general ledger. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this Purchases Clearing report, and we're going to move down to the utilities. And there are several things that you can do to clean up history in the purchase order module. So the number one thing that you want to make sure of is, please make sure that any transactions, receipt of goods, receipt of invoice, that you have in data entry. has been updated. Make sure that all of your postings are up to date. Obviously mine are not, because I haven't updated what I did earlier in the session. But please make sure that those are up to date. And you have several different options here. So if you want to purge your old completed POs, and this may be, all those POs may be out there because you've never done the period in processing. So if I click on Purge Completed POs, it says remove purchase orders completed on or before 365 days prior to. That 365, that is pulling directly from my setup. If you remember when we looked at the options earlier, and it said, how many days do you want to retain completed POs? So whatever date I put in here, it's going to go out and it's going to look at that date and 365 days prior, and anything that was completed before that, it is going to purge. Okay? My old expired master and repeating orders, I can purge them out. I can say to remove expired master orders, I can do repeating, or I can do just one of each, and then I can put in the expiration date. And then when I click proceed, it's going to remove those. One of the things that I failed to mention, that anytime that you're going to do this purge, in addition to making sure everything is updated, you want to make sure you have a good backup. Once you purge this, there is not an unpurge feature within Sage 100. You have to restore from a backup. And again, you may not just be restoring your PO module. It may be inventory. It may also be AP. So just kind of think about the whole picture. You can purge completed or canceled PO, the recap file. That's a different history file. You can purge obsolete POs. And that one is, I can't purge because I have that receipt of goods and entry in progress. So I would have to update that before I can do it. I can purge my PO history, and purchase order history will be removed for all non-existent PO orders. And if you remember back in my setup, I was keeping that history for a couple of years. So again, you can go through and purge those out, but just be very careful about doing that purge. If you are on a really old version of Sage, you're not going to have all of those various options. And depending on why a PO is open will depend on how you clean it up. So, you know, heaven forbid you're on a really, really old version, but if you are and you're like, I'm not sure exactly how to clean this up, you're going to have to get with our support team, because we have old instructions based on various scenarios. So it really depends on the scenario as to how we would recommend that you clean it up, because all of those nice utilities are not going to exist. With that being said, if you are on a really old version, you need to be getting in touch with us so that we can get you updated. That's going to be critical for many reasons, but if you're on an unsupported version, and that means that there's no longer going to be any service updates issued by Sage. There's not going to be any year-end updates. You're not going to have the ability to do the 1099 NEC form within purchase order. You're not going to be able to take advantage of any of the new features that are added to the Sage 100. And Oasis would not be able to contact Sage on your behalf if support was needed from Sage, nor would any old knowledge base exist for any issues that you might have. So if you need to update your Sage, please contact Garen Stout. And again, her email is gstout, S-T-O-U-T, @oasisky.com. and she will help navigate you through the upgrade process. So that concludes our session for today. So if you have any questions about anything that you saw today, if you need support in helping cleaning up a bunch of old POs, or trying to fully understand why POs are still open for years, please reach out to our support team at techsupport@oasisky.com, or you can email your questions to Garen as a follow-up, and she will be more than glad to pass that along. We're certainly glad to help you in any way that we can. So with that ends our presentation on purchase order tips and tricks. So thank you very much, and I hope you found the session valuable. So thank you very much.